booking. Now what we need to do is use the messages array to display all the messages inside the chart container. Also, I'm going to change this text area to a simple input so that I can press the enter button when sending a message. At the moment, if I press enter, it just goes to a new line. So instead of text area, I'm going to have input like this. And now if I send a message, I can just press the enter button and it sends the message. Now, when I send a message, I want to clear the input. And to do that, I'm going to set the input message to an empty string. Now, if I send a message, it just disappears. And if you scroll down, you can see the JSON results, which shows all the messages between the server and the user. And this is exactly the content that we logged into the console. But it's easier to read as it's well presented. Okay, now let's go ahead and display the messages inside the chart container. Before doing that, I'm going to add some margin bottom to the form so that it's separated from the bottom of the screen. And we can do that with a class margin bottom 2 or margin bottom 3, for example. That looks better. Also, let's change the number of columns occupied by the input and that's occupied by the submit button. So I'm going to give this one 11 columns and then the submit button 1 column. So 11 right there. And then for the button, only 1. And also let's give the form a container fluid class to set the width to roughly the same width as the width of the screen. And this looks a lot better. All right, now let's go ahead and display our messages. All right, to display the messages, we're going to use the messages array. So instead of displaying message 1 and 2, I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to use the messages array. And then I'm going to use the map method to create the contents that we will display in the chart container. So the map method is going to take a function as a parameter. So our function is going to take 2 parameters, each message and index of the message inside the array. And then it's going to return the content that we want to display. And I'm going to make sure that we don't display the system message. As you remember, the first element in our messages array is a system message where we set the context. So we only want to display the user messages and the assistant messages. So I'm going to have a condition here, message.role different from system. And then I'm going to have an AND operator, and then the content that we would like to display. So when you have a condition, then AND followed by any content, in this case, that means that we only show this content if that condition is fulfilled. So each message is going to be a div. And inside the div, I'm going to add the contents of the message. So the contents of the message is going to be message.content. Now it's very important when you use the map method to have an index for or a key for each element. So each div is going to have a unique key. So let's give it a key, which I'm going to set simply to the index of each message inside the messages array. And then I'm going to give it some classes. So class name. So if the message is a user message, then I'm going to give it a class alert info. And if the message is an assistant message, meaning a server message, then I'm going to give it a class alert success. So the class name is going to be a value that we will compute depending on the condition based on the role of the message. So I'm going to use string literals, and I'm going to calculate the value right here. So if the message dot role equals user, then I'm going to use the classes alert and alert info. Otherwise, I'm going to use the classes alert and alert success, meaning the message comes from the server. So let's save and try our code. Perfect. That works. And we can see all the messages. Let's carry on. And now what we want to do is scroll to the bottom of the screen when the content is bigger than the available space. So if I carry on like this, I can't see the new messages until I scroll. So we're going to make the screen scroll by itself. To do this, I'm going to write some code inside useEffect. So I'm going to import useEffects from React. And then we're going to write some code that will run whenever the messages array changes. So here is how we use the useEffect function. So it's going to take a function in the parameters, which will run whenever variables inside this array change. So the only variable that we're interested in is messages. So that's the only one I put inside that array. So this means, again, that whenever the value of messages changes, we're going to run code inside useEffect. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to define a constant chat container where I'm going to store the element of ID chat container. So document get element by ID chat container. And that's because I gave it an ID chat container right there. So let's make sure that it matches. That's great. So to build the scroll action, I'm going to access chat container, then apply the method scrollTo. So this method will take some options, which I'm going to call scrollOptions. And I'm going to need to define the scroll options before calling that method. So constant scrollOptions, that's going to be an object. And we're going to place all the options of the scrolling behavior right here. So first of all, we need an option top, which we're going to use to make the element scroll to the bottom of the chat container by setting the top value to its scroll height. So how do we do this? So I'm going to go to chat container dot scroll height of chat container to make sure we scroll all the way to the bottom of the element. And then I'm going to add some behavior. And I'm going to use a smooth scrolling behavior. So let's save and try our code. And you can see the scrolling behavior working as expected. Brilliant. All right, the next step is to add the characters to the top of our flexbox, and then make sure that whenever the user selects a character, the chat resets itself, and then we're going to change the context of the chat to make sure we are chatting with the right character. And that's something you're going to do in the next video. In this video, you're going to add personalities to your projects and make sure that whenever the user selects one of these personalities or characters, the context of the messages array changes to make sure we are chatting with the right person. So let's go ahead and build code behind this. First of all, I'm going to store the details of all characters inside an array I'm going to call personalities. So inside this array, I've got a list of objects. So each object has got a title property and a description property. So the title is the title of the character and the description is the description of the character. Also, inside public, I've got an images folder and then personalities folder where I stored 10 images starting from 1 to 10, just to make sure the code is easier to write when using numbers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the personalities array to build the personalities element. So let's go to this div where we are supposed to add all the personalities. First, I'm going to give the div some classes. So I'm going to make it a flexbox by giving it the dflex class. Then to center the elements, I'm going to use justify content center. So inside the curly brackets, I'm going to access the personalities array and then use the map method to build content. So this method will take a function which will take the personality of each character and its index inside the array and will return an HTML element. So our element is going to be a div and inside the div we're going to have the image, the heading and the description of the character. So each div needs to have a unique key. So let's set the key to the index of the element. And also let's give it a class name, text center to center the content and the text inside. All right. Now I'm going to start with the image. So each image is going to have a few attributes. So let's start with the source of the image. It's very important to set the source of the image relative to the location of the image based on the location of the index.html file. So source is going to be images / personalities / the number that we see right there. As I'm starting from 1, I'm going to get the index and add 1 to it because the index starts from 0 and we start from 1. So I'm going to write index + 1 and then .png. That's the source of the image. Then I'm going to set the alt attribute to the title of the personality. And this will show up if the image doesn't show up for any reason. Then let's add some classes to the image. So to make sure the image fits the container, I'm going to give it image fluid. And then we're going to make it rounded or even rounded circle to give it a circular shape. And then after that, I'm going to give it a class selected if it gets selected by the user. So that class is going to give the image a green thick border like this. To do this, I'm going to have a condition based on the selected option. So if the selected option is the title of this personality, personality.title, and I don't need the curly brackets here. So if that's the case, then we're going to give it a class selected. Otherwise, I'm going to leave this empty. And then I'm going to give it an onClick attribute, which will select the character if we click on the image. So this is going to be a function where I'm going to use the handleOptionSelect function I'm going to define later. So this function will take as a parameter the personality, title, and we'll set the option selected using the title of the personality. And then right after the image, I'm going to have a heading where I'm going to put the title of the personality, so personality.title, and then a paragraph where I'm going to put the description of the personality. All right, so let's go ahead and define this function. So it's going to take as a parameter an option, and then it's going to change the context of the messages array. Here, we're not only changing the context, but we are also resetting the whole conversation. So our messages array is going to be emptied, and then we will place only a first message inside it, which refers to the context. So at the very beginning, we set the messages array to this value. So let's use that value and change it. So I'm going to set messages to a similar value, but this time the content is going to be different. So we're going to write something like, I want you to act as, and then we're going to use the option, which refers to the title of the personality, like this. And after that, we need to set the selected option state to the new option passed to the handleOptionSelect function. So let's save our code. Now if I click on any of these characters, that should select the element in question. So it's not selected because we haven't added any styling yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So when an element is selected, we give it a class selected. And I'm going to style it using a border, which I'm going to set to 4 pixels, solid green. Now if I select any of these characters, you can see the green border. Now for some reason the image doesn't have like a circle shape. Let's have a look at our code, and it looks like I misspelled rounded, and now it looks better. All right, also let's make the headings have the same height. I'm going to access the headings by going to the personalities div using its ID. and then h6. So let's give them a height of 2 rem, for example. And that looks better. All right. So let's reload the web page. So please select a character. So I'm going to select one of these characters. And then I'm going to say hi. And it looks like it's working. Well, this is a French chemist, so it looks like the message has come back in French. What is your date of birth? Perfect. Now let's try another character. Great. One more one. I'm going to go this time for the mean assistant. And you can see that this assistant is not the friendliest. Great. Congratulations, you have just completed this amazing project using the skills you learned so far in the complete ChatGPT course. I'm very excited to take you through other chapters and amazing projects in this course.